Friends, we gather together this morning to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Toby Chernin. Toby's family so very much appreciates your attendance here this morning, which offers them a great deal of comfort and support. Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are as a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away, our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the Bible's first of 150 Psalms describes for us in language that is both poignant and succinct the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor taken the path of sinners, nor joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades, and whose fruit always flourishes. Let us join now together in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Toby Chernin died this past Monday at the age of 87. She lived a long and active and determined life, which is all the more remarkable because of the serious illnesses which afflicted her along the way. We will miss her. Toby was born in St. Paul, Minnesota, to her parents, Max and Marcella Kaplan. She graduated from high school there and went on to study for 2 years at the University of Minnesota, from which she received her associate's degree. Along the way, she met and started dating a handsome young man from Cleveland, Mike Chernin. After 2 years of courtship, some of it long distance, Toby and Mike were married. For their first couple of years of married life, they lived in several places. First in Columbus, Ohio, where Mike finished his degree, then in 4 different cities in the space of a year as Mike pursued his training for his work at General Electric and other companies. They ended up that year in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where they lived for 2.5 years and where their first child, Jeff, was born. When they moved back to Cleveland, Toby spent the next several years as a housewife and a mother, to her 3 growing children. When her children began to attend school, Toby was able to pursue some of the activities that engaged her attention and her interests. She began volunteering, which she continues doing throughout her life. She taught English as a second language at the Shaker Heights Public Library. She volunteered for several years in the Alzheimer's unit at the Montefiore Home for the Aged. She was active in the PTAs of her children's schools and served as the PTA president at the Sussex Elementary School in Shaker Heights. These then are some, but just some, of the facts about Toby Chernin's life, and they are important. But beyond the facts, what kind of a person was she? What were her abiding passions and her chief commitments? What were the essential traits of her character and of her relationships with others? When I first met with her family the other evening and asked them to describe their wife and mother-in-law and grandmother, the first thing one of them told me was that she was one of the best read people I have ever known, and that she belonged to book clubs, enrolled in literature courses, and read voluminously on her own. Nor did she simply read the easier or more current books. No, her interests were in the classics, the books that last. Moreover, she loved taking courses at the Siegel College of Jewish Studies, where she enrolled, among other courses, in every course that Professor Ori Soltis taught. Even when she was confined to a wheelchair, she continued to participate actively in the Case Western Reserve University's annual discussion days, which she served a term as president of the committee that organized these complicated endeavors. In addition, Toby was a member of a pretty high-powered discussion group with 4 or 5 other women, all of whom had PhDs in literature, a group that nevertheless welcomed Toby and valued her own contributions to the discussions, though she herself had had only 2 years of college. Toby was so bright and curious and hungry for a deeper understanding of the human condition and of the world in which she lived. And this active intellect of hers showed itself in many ways. Her grandchildren spoke the other evening about her acute intuition and of her passion for conversation. She was such a good listener, one of her grandchildren remarked. She always asked such great questions, another grandchild offered. She was intuitive and genuinely interested in our lives and what we thought, and she was so very smart. Toby, another chimed in, was interested in people, and she could strike up and hold a conversation with just about anyone, including people who were complete strangers. Moreover, she was respectful of everyone and in every situation. No one ever heard her being even slightly dismissive of anyone. Indeed, Toby was deeply concerned about the happiness and about the well-being of others, even strangers, and sometimes even at her own expense. On one occasion, as her family described it to me the other evening, Toby stopped in a driving rainstorm to pick up a hitchhiker. She pulled down the window slightly and called out to him, "Come on in." The man looked through the window and for some reason decided not to accept her invitation, though he was becoming increasingly drenched by the rain. But Toby continued to offer him a ride, in spite of the fact that danger to her may have at that moment loomed. Kindness and concern, these were traits woven into her character. Another of her grandchildren remarked that his grandmother and grandfather always welcomed their presence and even invited them often when they were growing up to join them on their antique shopping and other adventures. Come along with us, they would say, in a way that was completely natural and genuine. Now, one of Toby's signal attributes was her capacity to care about others, often to the point of serious worrying. She was always interested in what her grandchildren were doing and was always ready to help them in any way that she could. When one of her grandchildren was little, Toby reached out to help her learn to read, taking her to the library often. And that same granddaughter remarked that her grandmother also taught her the art of knitting and embroidery. Now, one of Toby's great passions was for sports. She loved baseball and football, but basketball was her main love. And her love for the game really began to flourish when she and Mike lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in the early days of their marriage. They regularly attended games of the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons, the forerunner of the Detroit Pistons. Indeed, both she and Mike became fanatic Piston supporters, clapping and yelling and having a great time. Memorable experiences which they cultivated and cherished throughout their years together. Now, those of you who knew Toby Chernin know that she had been diagnosed with MS more than 50 years ago, and that she endured many surgeries over the years for the many unrelated cancers that continued to afflict her. Now, in truth, I can hardly imagine how I, or perhaps in fact any of us, might respond to a series of decades-long maladies like this. But we know that Toby faced them stoically and insisted that she live her life as fully and as uncomplainingly as she could. In the words of her husband, Mike, Toby pushed a lot, and she pushed on. And this is what she did, with quiet but unmistakable strength and resolve. Toby Chernin is survived by her husband of 68 years, Mike, by her son Jeff and her daughters Shelley and Jody, by her daughter-in-law Terry and her son-in-law Mark, by her grandchildren Laura, Max, Jesse, Matt, Claire, and Aaron, by her brother Sam and her sisters-in-law Sylvia and Jan, and by many loving nephews, nieces, and cousins. She was predeceased by her parents, Max and Marcella, and by her brother-in-law, Bert. Toby Chernin lived a full life, a life in which she heroically faced down a series of serious and ongoing health challenges. But she didn't allow those challenges to defeat her, and she continued to fill her days with books and family and friends and sports and community volunteering. Those who loved and admired Toby Chernin will never forget her. Zichrona livracha. Her memory will always be our blessing. Amen. I now want to call on Toby's brother Sam, who will reflect upon the life, the qualities, and the contributions of his sister Toby.
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My sister was a wise, kind, and courageous woman. And as Barbara Brown said a few minutes ago, she was the nicest person you ever wanted to see. I'm the prequel, as they say in television. You've heard the time more recently. I'm here to tell you the beginning. It all started in 1931, the worst year of the Depression. And my mother and father lived through that Depression and were emotionally scarred by it in many ways. But if you asked my parents to tell you about the Depression, rather than telling you about the food that they didn't eat or the rent that they couldn't pay, they would tell you the story. And the story was always the same. They were walking on the street with Toby when she was a toddler, and she saw a doll, and she said she wanted the doll. She liked the doll. And my father had no money in his pocket, and he couldn't buy the doll. For the next 50 years, we heard the story of the doll. And my sister said to me once, "Don't you wish you could have been the star of the doll story?" Those were hard days, but they soon became better days. We had a good life. We grew up in St. Paul. That's a stable, comfortable community. And from the moment that I recall my sister, she was reading a book. What you heard from the rabbi about her habits today started when she was a kid. She was so smart. God, she was smart. And in those days, you could be promoted, or as they say, skip classes. And she skipped 2 classes. She was a star. And she was my big sister. And when we went to school together and I was in the kindergarten, she was in the upper grade, she took my hand and we went together. Now I tell you a story that has been blown out of proportion, but it is wonderful. They're all laughing in the other room. Because when I was in kindergarten, and she came and took me by the hand to go home, on a day that was windy, with gusts of wind, I blew out of her hand. And there were cars nearby, and it could have been a tragedy. That story has grown to the storm of the century, tornadoes of my major proportion, but I loved her dearly. She was in many respects affected by that story. I was more amused. But I wasn't amused by the other story. The other story was when she came down to take me one day, and the kindergarten teacher took her aside and said, "We may have to hold Sam back. He can't carry a tune." At my 80th birthday party 2 years ago, I spoke with passion about the fact that that teacher was right, even though I never liked her. At the university, she was a star. Whatever she did, she was a star. But then, as you heard from the rabbi, our lives changed. I was there the day that the book of Toby became the book of Toby and Mike. Because that was the day she fell in love. Now, was I in the room at the time? No, I wasn't. But I was close by. It was by happenstance that Mike had come with his friend Jay to visit my cousin, and Toby was available to date Mike. In those days, they were Myron and Gloria. Now they're Toby and Mike. And if you think it wasn't love in the first instance, you're wrong. She was smitten, and our lives changed. Our lives changed dramatically. And you could tell there was an atmosphere in the house that made things quite different. And she was in love in a very meaningful way. Remember, this is before email. And the piles of letters that went back and forth were extraordinary. I never read them, I promise you. But they went back and forth. And Toby and Mike got married. They got married after she had been at the university for only 2 years because she could not live without him. That was the beginning. And it's amazing. It's amazing because as she was dying, and I would ask her, "How are you?" She would say, "Mike is taking care of me. Mike always takes care of me." I want to tell you about my sister and the process of dying. You know, there are times when I read in the newspaper that someone has died of cancer, and they will say, after a courageous, long battle with cancer. And I think it's a rather strange way to begin an obituary, to talk about the process of dying. I should say I used to feel that way. I don't anymore. Because I've learned, particularly from my sister, that the process of dying is the process of living. She, a woman of rational being, a woman who was sensible, and a woman who was courageous. And this is the interesting part of it. Her courage carried her through to the end. She loved her family so much. Those kids are so wonderful. She adored her grandchildren, every one of them, and they in turn loved her. But she knew the end was coming, and she dealt with it in the way that sensible and mature people should. You know, this book of Toby and Mike is a great book. 68 years they were married. 68 extraordinary years of faithful devotion to one another and to their children. Love and caring, and obviously concerned about others. Dr. Seuss once said, "Don't cry that it's over, but be glad it happened." I'm very glad I had my sister for so long. Thank you.
O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody, and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. Will you please rise now for the Eil Malei Rachamim? Eil Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kadoshim Utahorim Gezohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Toiva Bat Mordechai, Shahacha La'olama. Bala Rachamim Yastireh B'Seter Kanafav La'olamim, V'yitzror Bitzrah Chayim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata V'Tanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkava V'Nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Toby Chernin, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace, and let us say together, Amen. Will you please be seated? I want to announce that the family of Toby Chernin will receive friends at the residence at 19110 South Woodland Road, and they'll receive friends today after our interment service and until 8 o'clock this evening. Our service now continues at Graveside at the Mayfield Cemetery. Once again, on behalf of the family, we are so grateful to you for your presence here this morning.